Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Ayin Dalid. More laws about mixtures. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rava bar Abu, Amar Rav. Tabaat shel avodah zara shenit areba b'mea tabaot v'nafla achat mehem liyam hagadol huteru kulan de'amrinan hachdinfal hainu de'isura. Rav Nachman, in the name of Rav, tells us a huge kula, a big leniency, that if a ring that is avodah zarah, here's a ring, and sometimes rings that has a seal on it might have an idol that's stamped into it, so it's a seal that is used for, devoted to avodah zarah, and therefore prohibited. And that one single ring gets mixed up in 100 permitted rings. Still, the whole mixture would be prohibited. This is a significant item, and so it's not batel. And then one of that 100, one of them falls into the Great Sea, into the Mediterranean. All the rest of them are permitted because we say, oh, the one that fell, we make a presumption that that was the prohibited one. So you see, this is a huge leniency that of the 100, I mean, why should we assume that the prohibited one fell in? If anything, it's more likely that it's the 99 of the 99 that remain behind, the prohibited one is one of them. But no, that's what Rav says, that we can make this presumption and the rest of them will be permitted. Rava challenges Rav Nachman on this ruling from our Mishnah, where it says that if you have a shor haniskal, which is prohibited to get any benefit from, and that gets mixed up with korbanot that are valid, then even if it's 1 in 10,000, all of them have to be left to die. Why? Amai, nema demit, isuramit. Why not? Just wait till one dies of the 10,000, one animal dies, and then we should say that, oh, that animal that died, let's make a presumption that that was the shor haniskal, and then the rest of them will be permitted according to your logic. Amar le, Rav damar ki Rabbi Eliezer, ditnan, Rabbi Eliezer omer, im karab harosh shel echad mehen, yikrebu kol harashim kulam. And Rav Nachman answers Rava's challenge that Rav is following the lenient opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. You're right. Our Mishnah over here in the beginning of our Perek is in fact a stringent opinion, but Rav can follow the lenient opinion in the following Mishnah, this Mishnah that we mentioned already on the previous stuff, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you have a lot of korban olah sacrifices, one of them is invalid and the other ones are valid. So now they all got mixed up. The limbs, you cut up the animals and the limbs got all mixed up. So therefore, you should not offer any of them because they're all, we don't know which one's which, so they're all going to be prohibited. However, if someone, before he realized that there was a prohibited one mixed in there, Kohen takes the head of one of the animals, then all the rest of the heads you can put up on the Mizbeach, because once you put one of them, we can make a presumption that the one that they put was the prohibited one. We don't really know for sure, but this is a leniency. And you assume that they're all, that one was prohibited and then the rest of them are fine. So you see that Rabbi Eliezer matches precisely the opinion that Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav. So Rav is following the lenient opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. והאמר רבי אלעזר לא התיר רבי אליעזר אלא שניים שניים אבל אחד אחד לא. Hold on, Rabbi Elazar, the Amorah, said that Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana, when he said in this Mishnah that's permitted to put the rest of the heads on, that's only if you put them on 2 by 2, but not if you put only one at a time. Why? Well, so you need two things. First of all, you have all these heads mixed up, and then you put one on without realizing. Really, you shouldn't put any on, but someone put one of them on. We can presume that that is the one that was prohibited, but we're not really sure, and therefore, if you're going to put the rest on one by one, then it really could be that one of those is the prohibited one and you're doing a prohibited action. However, if you take 2 by 2, in other words, take 2 heads at a time of different animals, and you put them on 2 at a time, then at least, even if one of those happens to be the prohibited one, the other one that he's putting on at the same time is permitted. So therefore, that action of the Kohen is partly permitted. So that but doing it 2 by 2 waters it down a little bit, and that is a better way to do it. So you need both, that you put one by mistake on it, and so that one at least could be the prohibited one, so that allows us to put the rest of them, but even the rest of them should be 2 by 2, so that within the 2, at least one of them is okay, so with the action that this Kohen is doing, still has a permitted side to it. So that's what Rabbi Elazar said about Rabbi Eliezer. So therefore that should be the same true for Rav's law. Amar le ana tarte ka'amina. And Rav Nachman says, yes, indeed, that's what I meant. That has to be 2. When you have these 100 rings, and then one prohibited ring fell into them, and then one of those rings fell into the sea, then the other ones you can sell, get benefit from, but only if you do it 2 by 2. That's what I meant to say, because I'm following, in fact, Rabbi Eliezer. And that would be in Rabbi Elazar's interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer, it would be that you have to sell 2 by 2. Amar Rav, טבעת של עבודה זרה שהתערבה ב100 טבעות ופרשו 40 למקום אחד ו60 למקום אחר. פרשה אחת מ40 אינה אוסרת, אחת מ60 אוסרת. Rav gives a related ruling that if you have a ring that is avodah zarah, and it got mixed up with 100 other rings, same as the case before. But in this case, they separated into 40 of the rings went to one place, and 60 went to another place. So you have 60-40, so the majority is in the 60. So therefore, it's more likely that the prohibited ring is among the 60 than the 40. Now the halacha is that if of those 40, one becomes separated and mixes into a whole nother bunch of them, that other bunch will not be prohibited. But if one of the 60 gets separated and mixed into another bunch of them, then all of those are prohibited. The idea is that the 40 is a minority, so there's already less of a chance that it's one among the 40. Now, the 40 would still be prohibited, but if one of those falls into something else, that's a second mixture, so then it's okay. But the 60 is more likely to be in the 60, and therefore, when it separates from the 60, that mixture itself is prohibited. We ask, Maishana achat marbaim delo, de amrinan isura beruba ite. Achat mishishim nami amrinan isura beruba ite. Now we ask about this logic. What's the difference between in the 40 that we say over there, when one leaves the 40, it's not prohibited? Because we say that, let's presume that the prohibited ring is with the majority, which is with the 60, and therefore it's probably not with the 40, so something that came from the 40 mixed into something else will be permitted. But if so, then achat mishishim nami amrinan, the one that left the 60, why do we also say that, okay, one separated from the 60, leaving 59 behind? Well, it's more likely that the prohibited one stayed among the 59 and is not that one that separated from them. So in other words, for the same logic that you permitted one that came from the 40, you should also permit one that came from the 60, because it's more likely to be in the 59 that remain behind, and the one that separated is more likely to be permitted. If you permit the 40, you should certainly permit this one. Rather, what Rav actually meant to say is, if those 40 all separated to one place, and those 40 all got mixed up with other ones, they do not make that whole group is not prohibited. But if the 60 was separated from the whole 100, and those 60 got mixed up with a whole bunch, then they do make that bunch prohibited. So that's the idea. So because if it's a minority of them that then gets mixed up, we assume that the prohibited one stayed in the majority. But if the majority gets separated and gets mixed up, we assume that the prohibited one was in the majority and now it's mixed up with other things, so that whole thing will be prohibited. The Rav Yehuda says, I cited this, I requoted it to Shmuel. Amar li hanach la'avodah zarah shesefeka usfek sefeka asura ad sof ha'olam. And Shmuel said, leave the matter of avodah zarah on the side, because avodah zarah is much stricter than all other matters. And regarding avodah zarah, even if you have a double sefek, one falls into many and one of those many fall into something else, it's prohibited even if until the end of the whole world, even if that one of the third mixture falls into a fourth mixture and one falls into a fifth mixture. Forever, Avodah Zarah is never going to be batel. So Shmuel is going to be much stricter, and so they certainly would disagree with Rav. Okay, so now let's deal with Shmuel's very stringent opinion, and we challenge it from a baraita. Metibeh. Safek avodah zarah asura, usfek sefeka muteret. Kesad. Kos shel avodah zarah shenafal osar male kosot. Kulan asurin. Perash echad mehen l'ribo, umeribo l'ribo, mutarin. This baraita says that if you have one safek regarding avodah zarah, one avodah zarah thing falls into another group, then it's prohibited. But if it's a sefeka, double sefek, it's permitted. And it gives an example. If you had a cup that was used for avodah zarah, here's a cup, if it's devoted for use for avodah zarah, it's prohibited. Now that fell into a whole storehouse of permitted cups. All of them are prohibited. That's only one safek. But if one of those was separated into 10,000, and one of those into a further 10,000, then it's permitted. So this baraita permits. It's not so clear from the baraita. Is it safek sefeka, a double safek, or is it a triple safek? Because the example sounds like it reads like a triple safek. So that's a machloket between Rashi and Rambam. But just say double safek, because that's what it says, safek sefeka. Then you could interpret this as a new case, perash echad, one, prohibited one. Came to 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, although it sounds like it's actually three, one separated. Okay, either way, a double safek or a triple safek. This is permitted. So this is, either way, it's a challenge against Shmuel, who said, no matter how many safeks, it's always going to be prohibited regarding avodah zarah. The answer is Tana'ehi. It's a machloket between Tana'im. This baraita is going to be the relatively more lenient opinion that says sefek and avodah zarah is permitted, and Shmuel is going to say a stringent opinion that sefek and avodah zarah is prohibited. Although notice that Shmuel says leave avodah zarah alone. There sefek is prohibited. That means according to Shmuel, regarding other prohibitions, a sefek would be sufficient. So let's see the two opinions in this baraita. The Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda omer rimone badan osrin bekol shehu kesad nafal echad mehen letoch ribo meribo leribo asurin. If you have these pomegranates from badan and one of them is prohibited as orla, so it's going to be prohibited even one in many. One in 10,000, even the smallest bit. How so? If one of these prohibited pomegranates falls into 10,000, and one of those then falls into a further 10,000, it's prohibited. So the Yehuda says safek sefeka is prohibited. The problem is here he's not talking about avodah zarah, he's talking about orla, and yet he says safek sefeka is prohibited. So it's actually too stringent. It's even more stringent than Shmuel, because Shmuel only said the stringency regarding avodah zarah, not other things. So we're going to have to see where this fits in. Then Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Shimon leribo asurin umeribo leshlosha mishlosha l'makom acher mutarin. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yehuda, says the name of another Rabbi Shimon, so it's called just Rabbi Shimon. If you have this prohibited pomegranate that falls into 10,000, that mixture is prohibited. That's only one safek. But if of that 10,000, one of them separates and falls into 3, and from those 3, it falls into something else. This also sounds like you need triple, but a triple or double, however you understand it, then it's permitted. So you see that Rabbi Shimon says, at least regarding orla, safek sefeka is permitted. Now let's see. Shmuel damar keman. Who will Shmuel follow? Well, it doesn't fit with Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda says safek sefeka is prohibited even in orla and other things. And Shmuel said we're only stringent in avodah zarah, but we're lenient in other matters. If he follows Rabbi Shimon says permitted, and he would say safek sefeka is permitted in regarding avodah zarah also. So Rabbi Shimon's too lenient, Rabbi Yehuda is too stringent. Oh, so maybe you could say, actually, it could be that Shmuel follows Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon would make a difference between avodah zarah and other prohibitions. When Rabbi Shimon said in this baraita that safek sefeka is permitted, that's because it's orla. But if it was avodah zarah, then he would be stringent. So that could make sense. That perfectly fits this baraita, and then Shmuel could follow Rabbi Shimon. But here's the problem. Ela had Tanya, safek avodah zarah asura, safek sefeka muteret, maneh, la Rabbi Yehuda v'la Rabbi Shimon. There's yet another baraita that says one sefek for avodah zarah is prohibited. A double sefek in avodah zarah is permitted. Who could be the author of this baraita? It wouldn't be Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says sefek sefeka is prohibited, even in other cases, and certainly avodah zarah. So this would be too lenient for Rabbi Yehuda. And if Rabbi Shimon is lenient in orlab and stringent in avodah zarah, then Rabbi Shimon also could not be the author, because Rabbi Shimon would say no, sefek sefeka and avodah zarah is also asur. So then we'd be left with nobody that could be the author of that baraita. Therefore, le'olam Rabbi Shimon, it has to be that this baraita has to be Rabbi Shimon, and therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, sefek sefeka is permitted both for orla and for avodah zarah, and therefore Shemuel cannot be following Rabbi Shimon, because the Shemuel says sefek sefeka and avodah zarah is prohibited. So how about Shemuel? Shemuel agrees with Rabbi Yehuda in one matter, that avodah zarah is going to be sefek sefeka prohibited. However, Shemuel disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda in another matter. When it comes to other prohibitions like orla, then Shemuel will be lenient and say sefek sefeka is permitted. Amar mor meribo lishlosha umishilosha lemakom acher mutar. Now we go back and cite the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says that if you have one prohibited pomegranate that fell into 10,000, and then from that 10,000, one came out and fell into 3, and then from that 3, one fell out and fell into something else, then that last mixture is permitted. We ask, why do I have to say that it fell into 3? Even if it fell into 2, it would still be a majority permitted against the one that's prohibited. 1 and 2 is still a majority. So why did it say 3? The answer is, when we say 3, what we meant is 2 and the prohibited one that fell into it. In fact, that's the case. That one came out and fell into 2, so altogether there's 3 and it's batel. Or a different answer is that you could say, in fact, it's talking about one that fell into 3, so there's 4 altogether, and you need 4 altogether because we're following the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who was interpreted just above by Rabbi Elazar, who says that even when you can benefit, it's only 2 by 2. In that case, where you had the heads of the animal and one was put on the mizbeach, and then the rest of them, yes, you can use, but only 2 by 2. So tir also has to be 2 by 2. If you have 3 altogether, it's an odd number, and so that's why it says 1 into 3, so that you have 4, an even number, so you could take 2 and then the other 2. אמר ריש לקיש, חבית של תרומה שנתערבה ב100 חביות ונפלה אחת מהן לים המלח, הותרו כולן דאמרינן הך דנפל דאיסורה נפל. We have a law that's similar to the law that we started with, that with case with the rings, where Rav says if one falls in, then all the rest of them are permitted. Resh Lakish says here also that if you have a barrel of teruma is permitted to a kohen, but it's prohibited to everybody else, and it got mixed up with 100 other barrels, and one of them fell into the Dead Sea, the rest of them are permitted. Before one falls in, 1 in 100. Well, 1 in 100 is good for teruma, but not if it's a significant item. And everybody agrees that a sealed barrel is a significant item and is not batel. But once one of them falls into the Dead Sea, then the rest of them are permitted, because we make an assumption, the one that fell in is the permitted one. Now we ask, why do we need Rav Nachman's law and Resh Lakish's law? We need both. If we only had the above law of Rav Nachman with the rings, which is a case of avodah zarah, I would have thought, when do we say that one that falls into the sea that makes the rest of them permitted? Only regarding avodah zarah, because there's no way that avodah zarah will ever be permitted in any case. So therefore, we're going to be lenient, because otherwise we have no other route to permit it. So, okay, we'll let a person rely on the fact that the one that fell in was the prohibited one and the rest are permitted. But when it comes to Tirumah, we have a better way, a better solution. It's something that can be permitted by selling the whole thing to a Kohen. Sell all 100 barrels. 101 barrels to a Kohen, and then the Kohen is permitted. So that's a general rule that we do not say batel if it's davar sheyesh lo matirin. If it's something that if you wait a while, it'll become permitted, like chametz on Pesach, or there's some situation, a person for whom it is permitted, then it's not batel. I might think that, and that's why I need Resh Lakish to say also in Tirumah, even though it's davar sheyesh lo matirin, you can still rely on this leniency, and if one barrel falls in, the rest are permitted. And if I only had this case of Resh Lakish regarding Tirumah, I would have thought that we only rely on this leniency if it's a barrel where it's very apparent to anybody who's nearby will notice a big barrel falls into the sea, like, oh, look, that barrel fell into the sea. And then they'll understand when they see that the people are partaking of the other barrels to say, oh, it's because one fell into the sea. That's why the rest are permitted. But when it comes to rings, which is a very small thing, where most people won't notice if just a little ring falls into the sea, and then they'll see that the people are using or selling all the rest of the rings, and they won't know that it's because one fell in, and they'll think it's permitted, and that it's batel. So therefore, I might think that in the case of rings, we would not apply the leniency. And that's why I need Rav's law to say, even if it's something small that wouldn't be so noticeable, still it's permitted if one in fact fell in. The rest are permitted. Amar Rabba, lo hitir Resh Lakish ela habit min kera nefilata. Aval te'ena la. Rabba says, in fact, following up on one of those Hava Aminas, says in fact that Resh Lakish only permits a barrel that fell in, then we can assume that was the prohibited one and the rest are permitted, because there it is very noticeable. But let's say if it was just one fig, you had a whole bunch of one fig that was prohibited fell into a whole bunch of other figs, and then one fell into the sea. No, Resh Lakish would not permit it because it's not noticeable, and people will make a mistake and think, even if it doesn't fall into the sea, that a mixture like that is permitted. But Rav Yosef Amar afilu te'ena kin nefilata kach aliyata. Rav Yosef says, no, even if it's one fig that falls into a whole bunch of figs, it's permitted because it's as noticeable when it falls in as when it falls out. So that if the initial falling in of the fig, if nobody noticed that, and nobody noticed that one fell into the sea, so nobody noticed that it was prohibited in the first place, so that's okay. And if someone is so discerning and he noticed that one fell in, he'll also notice that one fell into the sea, and that's why they're permitted. So it's equal on both sides. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Havit shel teruma shenafla b'mea chaviyot, potech echad mehem v'notel hemena kedei dimua v'shoteh. We learned that a barrel is only prohibited and not batel if it's sealed, but if it's open, then it's not significant anymore. So Rabbi Elazar teaches that if you have a barrel of tirumah that got mixed up with 100 barrels that are permitted, what you do is you open one of the barrels and you take an amount equal to what you'd have to give to tirumah, which is generally 100th, and then you can drink the rest of it. So this you make one not significant, and then it's batel. Yateb Rav Dimi v'kamar lahashmata. Amar le Rav Nachman gama v'shateh kahaze nahacha ela ema niftecha achat mehen notel emena kedei dimua v'shoteh. Rav Dimi was sitting and he was repeating this statement of Rabbi Elazar, and Rav Nachman said, "No, can't be. You could just swallow and drink. You could do this lecha techila." Generally, when you say things are batel, it's only if you did it, if it was mixed up, and then one fell into the sea or one opened, okay, then we can permit, but you can't do it on purpose. Rather, change the words. He didn't mean that you can open one, but rather, if one somehow got opened, then you can take an amount of tirumah out of it, and the rest of it you can drink only b'di'avad. Amar Rabbi Oshaya, chavit shel tiruma shinit arba b'me'a v'chamishim chaviyot v'niftechu me'a mehen notel emena kedei dimua v'shoteh. Rabbi Oshaya teaches a related law. If you have one barrel of tiruma that gets mixed up with 150 barrels of permitted wine, and then somehow 100 of them became opened by themselves, somehow it got opened, not on purpose, then one can take from that 100 the amount that one would give to terumah. It's 100 barrels, so that would be, if 1%, 1 barrel's worth of terumah, and you give that as, you designate that as terumah, and the rest of it you can drink. Now, how about the other 50 barrels that remain behind? Those are prohibited until they get opened. In other words, you might think in this case that since you opened 100, so then surely the prohibited barrel, most likely the prohibited barrel is among those 100. And since those were all taken care of, so the 50 that remain, that's in the minority, are probably permitted. So I might think that would be permitted to go ahead and open the 50 lechatechila. But not so. We do not apply that rule here that the prohibited one is probably in the majority of the 100, but rather of all the 150, any one that gets opened by itself, then you could drink it. But even until the last 50, you can't, even if the 100 were opened before, you cannot assume that the last 50 are permitted. Rather, you have to wait till it gets opened on its own. We continue by quoting the next part of the Mishnah that said, Harobeya vehanirba, an animal that was involved in bestiality or other sins like with idol worship, or it was used as payment to a prostitute or price of a dog, or kilayim, or if it's a terefa. The first set of things that was involved in some kind of sin, we're talking about a case where there was one witness, not two witnesses. If it was two witnesses, then it would be killed. But there's only one witness, so we don't kill the animal. However, it is still prohibited to use as a korban. And the terefa also is prohibited to use as a korban. If an animal like this, which is prohibited to use as a korban, gets mixed with other animals that are permitted to use for a korban, then, that's the Mishnah said, you have to let them graze until they get a blemish, and then you sell them. And then with the proceeds, you buy an animal of the most expensive of the bunch and use that as a korban instead. We understand all the rest of the items on the list, how we could not know. There's some animal that committed some kind of crime. Now it gets mixed up with others. We don't know what the original one looked like, and so that's easy for that to get mixed up. So those make sense. However, for a terefa, shouldn't you be able to tell which one is a terefa from among the bunch? If you know which one it is, so then go and take it. If you have an animal, how would you know it's terefa? It has to be something that can be seen on the outside. So if you see an animal that is missing a limb, it's missing a limb. It got mixed up in this bunch. Okay, so let's go look. Find the one that's missing a limb. That's the one that's a terefa. You take it out. That one is prohibited. The rest are permitted. It's not a mixture. And if you can't tell, well, then how did you know in the first place that it's a terefa? A terefa can be from an internal organ or external. If it's internal, then you won't know until you do shechita, kill it and look inside. They didn't have MRIs. So then, but here we're talking about where it's alive. So it must be something that you can tell externally. So if you can't tell from the external, then how did you know in the first place that is a terefa? So we're going to give 3 different answers of how you may know something is a terefa, even if it's not externally evident. Amri deber biyanai. Chacham eskinan kegon di arab nekubat hakos bidrusat hazeeb. Biyanai says we're talking about where an animal that was pierced by a thorn. Now, pierced by a thorn, it will make a mark in it, but a thorn is not a deadly injury, and that's not terefa. It got mixed up with an animal that was clawed by a wolf. A wolf also causes an injury, and that one is going to be deeper and more injurious, and that one is a terefa. From the outside, it's hard to tell which one it is, and so you have some animals, 2 animals, more animals that got mixed up. And they have an injury, but we don't know if it was from a thorn or from a wolf, and that's why we don't know. We can't tell them apart. Although we know that there was one that got an injury by a wolf in there. Resh Lakish Amar Kigon di Arab bin Nefula name libdeka. Resh Lakish says, it's an animal that fell from a height. If an animal falls from a high building, falls on the floor, then there's a worry that it could be a terefa. We're talking about where it lives. So this animal fell, and then now it got up, and it's in the pack and the rest of the mixture. And now we can't tell. Well, you cannot tell which one it is. But since it fell down, there's one that is a terefa there, because we worry that there might have been some damage to the internal organs that cannot be seen from the outside. We challenged the shakish that nifula also let us check it, because when something falls from a great height, then we see if it can walk, can it stand up, can it walk by itself? And the general rule is that if it can get up and walk, then it's not a terefa. So let's go check and see if the animals over here, can they walk or can they not walk? Kasabar amda siricha me'ait la'et halcha siricha bedika. So Resh Lakish must think that if the animal, when it falls off of the building, if it can stand up, then you still have to wait 24 hours to see if it's injured or not. And if after it falls, not only does it stand up, but it can even walk just fine, then you have to check it after it's killed. Then you have to check the internal organs to make sure. But while it's alive, it's walking around, you can't tell. And since you can't tell from the outside while it's walking around, and it got mixed up with the others, so therefore it's a terefa, but it got mixed up and we can't tell from the outside. Rabbi Yirmiyah amar kigon di'ara bevlad terefa, Rabbi Eliezer he damar velad terefa lo yikrab legabe mizbeach. Rabbi Yirmiyah says we're talking about a case of an offspring of a terefa. Let's say you have a mother that is missing a limb, and that mother animal gives birth to an offspring, and their offspring is perfectly healthy. And Rabbi Eliezer, if he follows Rabbi Eliezer, he thinks that the offspring of a terefa cannot be offered on the mizbeach, even though the offspring is perfectly fine, perfectly healthy, cannot be put on the mizbeach, and so that is the status of a terefa, even though you can't tell anything from the outside, it's perfectly healthy. And that's what it's talking about in the Mishnah. Now, we have three opinions. How come they didn't each agree with the other? Kulhu could be anai la'amri, ben nekubata kos dot haze'er medayadia. Hai mashech v'hai agel. The others did not agree with Rabbi Anai, because you can tell the difference between something that got injured by a thorn or something that got injured by a claw of a wolf, because the claw of a wolf is going to be elongated, that injury, whereas the one from a thorn is going to be round. So you examine it and you can tell which one's which. Keresh Lakish la'amri kasabri amda ena siricha me'ait la'et halcha ena siricha bedika. However, they do not agree with Resh Lakish, because the other sages think that if after an animal fell off of a high building, it can stand up, then you don't have to wait 24 hours. And if it can walk, then you don't even have to check it after it gets slaughtered. In other words, it can walk. You look around at the herd and you see they can all walk fine. And this opinion says, if it can walk, then it's totally fine. It's not considered a terefa. You don't even have to check it. It's walking fine. It's good. And therefore, it's not a terefa, so it'll be permitted. It's only Resh Lakish that thinks that even after it fell, even if it can walk around, still it has a status of that you have to check that is terefa after you slaughter it. So that's why, it's a terefa. That animal you cannot give as a sacrifice. But according to the other opinions, they say you could sacrifice. If it's walking around, then that means it's okay, and you could sacrifice it. That's why they don't agree with Resh Lakish. And the other sages do not agree with Rabbi Yirmiyah, because he has to follow the minority opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the offspring of a terefa cannot be offered on the mizbeach, but that they don't agree with that minority opinion. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.